Happy birthday to me, happy birthday to me. Happy birthday, dear Philip, happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me, happy birthday to me. Happy birthday, dear Philip, happy birthday to me. Oh, this is the COVID hand washing thing, isn't it, that we're meant to do? Making sure that we sing happy. It is my birthday next week actually, but I'm not doing it because of that. It's the song that we're meant to sing, to make sure we sing it twice through. So make sure we're washing our hands properly. And we're meant to rub on the wrists as well and interact with the fingers like this, aren't we, as well, and all that kind of thing to do it right. So the COVID hand washing thing. I'm gonna come and sit down over here, and that's what the Jews did when they washed their hands. They had to wash with they would get their fists and they would rub it together like that and make sure that they were cleaning them thoroughly when they came back from places like the market and other places like that. Before they ate anything, they had to wash their hands really well. I'm about to eat some cake now. Good cake. I wonder if you have any routines before you start eating. I know one of them should be not eating with your mouth full. I'll have finished in a minute, so I'll give you a moment to think. What are your routines before you eat? Apart from maybe washing your hands, and maybe you don't wash your hands. Do you get people to sit round the table together and eat? Do you sit in front of the telly? What do you do? Good, it's gone. Well, the Jews, one of their routines, one of the things that they did was washing their hands, like we've said. And Jesus' disciples would normally, you'd think, have done that before they sat down to eat. And that's what they were doing. They were eating at the time at the beginning of this story together. And the leaders from Jerusalem had heard a lot about Jesus. And so they'd come down all the way from Jerusalem to see what Jesus was doing and to hear about this man firsthand. And they arrived and they'd been watching him, and then they came to him while he was eating with his disciples, observing him, and they realized that the disciples hadn't washed their hands before they sat down to eat. Do you know what amazes me about this story? Is they must have heard all these good things about Jesus, and they must have seen him do some things. I mean, he's just fed the 5,000 in Mark's Gospel, and lots of other miracles have been happening and so on. His teaching's amazing, and people are gathering from all over. And it says, and they saw that the disciples hadn't washed their hands, that they were eating without washing their hands. Of all the things they could have seen and talked about, they picked up on this one thing, that they hadn't washed their hands. Is that a critical spirit or what? Just looking for things to have a go at. Wow. But anyway, that's what they do. They pick up on this thing. Now, why was this such a big deal? Well, Mark explains why it was such a big deal. Because some of the readers of Mark's Gospel, who he was writing to, would have been Gentiles. So they wouldn't necessarily have understood all of these kind of rituals and ceremonies and things like that. So he says, this is something that they did. They always wash their hands. He explains what it's about. And he says it's things like when they came back from the marketplace that they would do this. Well, what he doesn't say really is why they would do that when they came back from the marketplace. And it's not just because it was perhaps a bit dirty at times, and you kind of, you know, if you've been out shopping, you might wash your hands before you eat. It wasn't just about that. It was partly to do with they're likely to have touched Gentiles while they were there at the marketplace. And this was one of the reasons that they would wash their hands. It was because their hands may be unclean because of touching Gentiles. Because to touch a Gentile, that's anyone who's not a Jew. would be considered like they're unclean. The Gentiles are unclean. That's why they would cross over on the other side of the street. That's why they would avoid a village if there was Gentiles in it, like the Samaritans, for example. It wasn't good to touch them. It was so bad, in fact, that if the shadow of a Gentile went on something like the kettle, went on the kettle as a Gentile walked past it, and it wasn't a kettle like this, of course, or a jug or a cup, then what they would do is they would have to wash those as well. And that's why it refers to that in the passage. If you read it in Mark chapter 7, it said, and they do things like washing the cups and the kettles and things like that. They would wash them as well. But that was the reason, because everything had to be clean, and it could have been past the shadow of the Gentile over it, and so on. Seems, and these were traditions of the elders. This isn't what God had told them to do. This was something that the leaders of the temples and so on, the priests and so on, the elders had passed down over the years, and everyone was doing it. They had more and more of these kind of rules all the time. And it became really oppressive for the people because they had to remember to do so many things. It was tiring and hard work. And all these things were meant to be done to stay right with God. And the teachers of the law and people that would be looking out for people, the Pharisees, looking out for people to make mistakes so they could pick up on them and have a go, just like they'd done with Jesus' disciples here. So when Jesus said this, the people would have been waiting on bated breath for the answer. What's Jesus going to say? Is he going to say we can do away with all these things and we don't have to bother with them? Or is he going to say, oh yeah, sorry, I've made a mistake, I should put this right now? What does Jesus do then? What's his response to this? Well, he points them straight back to Scripture. And he says to them, look, the prophets talked about this. You guys are just being hypocrites because you've got all these rules and things like that, and you've made them all more important than God's rules now. All your own rules that you've brought in, they've taken precedent, and you're focusing on all of those and not getting back to the heart of what this was all about in the first place. You've lost your way. Imagine if the new COVID rules that we've got developed and became that you had to wear masks if you had a cold. Let's say COVID's all over and it's kind of done that, but the tradition is that everyone still has to wear masks, or the tradition is that we can't sing inside. And what if that went further and new rules were made that you can't preach inside or you can't pray inside? We'll just add more rules onto it all the time. And so in the end, in years and years down the line, we've forgotten why these were introduced in the first place. And it was just to protect us from getting ill from COVID, not from colds or flu or anything like that. And certainly it wasn't about not being able to pray in church. It was singing because you project more. Well, that's what had happened here. They'd lost their way with it. And even after, even though Jesus was basically the antidote to all this problem that they were having was amongst them, they didn't recognize that either. They would find that out later, of course. Well, other examples I can give to this. What about a terrorist walking into a suicide bomber, walking into a hospital? And when you go in a hospital, they've got all the machines, haven't they, where you have to put gel on your hands as you go in. So the suicide bomber goes into hospital, sees the sign saying you've got to gel your hands, gels the hands, walks down the corridor, makes sure they've all got clean hands, and then blows himself up. What's that about? It's just lost the point of the whole thing. What about a story that I had when I was in Israel, and I was on a hill, but the same mount that the feeding of the 5,000 is meant to have taken place on. And there was a little church there that had been set up as a reminder of a place people could visit, because this is where Jesus had fed the 5,000. And we went up there and were looking at this from the hillside. And we saw a lady go along who went to go in the temple, and she didn't have her shoulders covered. Now, there was a sign saying that you need to have your shoulders covered if you go into this place, because it was very hot, so people wear shorter tops and things like that. This lady started to go in, and there was a nun sat at the side, and she had the full gown on and everything else. And she started saying to this lady in the Israeli language, whatever it was, and she started saying to her, you can't go in, you can't go in. But the lady obviously didn't know she was talking to her, and she just carried on going through. And all of a sudden, the nun jumped up, she ran over to her, and she started chasing her out of the church, out of the temple, whatever it was, church of whatever. And she started chasing her out with a kind of broom thing and hitting her with it and running out. And the woman was like, "What?" And she started running away from this woman, and the nun woman was chasing her down the road with this thing, shouting at her. And I just sat and I was watching this and just thinking, what would Jesus make of this? Someone is going there, either whether it's a Christian or it's not a Christian, they're going because they're interested in knowing more about what Jesus was about and just being in there in the presence of this. And she's getting shouted at and chased down the street because she didn't have her shoulders covered. Now, I understand the thing of respect and all that kind of thing, but the rules just tend to miss the point of what Jesus would be about. I'm sure he wouldn't want that seem to be happening. Jesus uses his own example in this passage. He says that God says we should honour our father and mother. But what they've done is they've used this word korban, which meant that anything, it meant that any help that I was going to give to you, I'm now dedicating myself to God. So he says, you say to your parents, korban, meaning I'm not going to help you. I'm going to just dedicate any help I was going to give to you as my parents. I'm going to give that to God. I'm dedicating my life to him, so I don't need to help you anymore. And he said, that's your rule. That contradicts and goes against God's rule, which is to honour your parents. Do you not see what you're doing here? And the Pharisees would make people still do that, even if it was said in anger to the parents. So say they had a row with the parents and they said, oh, korban to you, and just shouted out that. Then the Pharisees would make them hold to that, even if they changed their mind later. The fact they've said the word to their parents would mean that they then cannot help the parents ever again. It would be upheld. It was things like that Jesus was challenging and using that example of the kind of ways they twist things and were just picking up on things all the time. So Jesus said this, but not everyone got it. Not everyone got the heart of what he was saying. So Jesus has to then explain this to the crowds and later to his disciples. And we'll carry on reading now. If we go back to Paul, we'll finish this passage up. Thanks, Paul. So, Jesus first addresses the crowd. And he says to the crowd, nothing outside a person makes them unclean. Nothing outside that goes in makes a person unclean. It's what's inside that comes out that makes people unclean. He explained that to the crowd, and then later on they went to the house, and the disciples said to him, Jesus, what does that mean? What does that saying mean that you were talking about? And I love this. He says to his disciples, he says, are you so dull? Are you so dull that you don't understand this? Things outside don't go into the heart, but they go into the stomach, like the cake I was having before. And then they come out the body. And it's that makes people unclean. Now, was he talking about this? Well, in a way, I guess so. When it comes out, it's unclean. But I don't think that was the main point of this. I think the main point was that he was saying, of course, is that it's the things that come out of our hearts that make us truly unclean. And then he has a list of those things in verse 21 and verse 22, and it sums up people's thoughts, evil thoughts. It sums up things like some of the actions, immorality and envy and things like those. You can read about them in verse 21 and 22. And what Jesus was doing, he was providing a new vantage point. And I'm going to move out of this room and go to a different point. So Jesus was providing a new vantage point for people so that they could see beyond the ritual preparation to the original intention of what all these things were about, because they lost their way and got caught up in all these kind of rules and things. And the original intention was, with God's laws, was to help people be right with him and be in good relationship with him. But they kept failing by getting too caught up in all of that and making more and more rules and getting too legalistic and making it about the rules rather than about the heart of what God wanted, which was to be in a loving and good relationship with his people. He wanted them to repent of that, as the prophets had told them before. He wanted them to now have faith in him. And so we're going to come to communion now. And as we do, there's some things we can reflect on today to do with this message that we read. And first of all, communion is not about the ritual of doing communion, and it has to be done in a certain way. I know for some people doing communion this way when we're apart from each other doesn't seem right, but let's remember what the heart is about this, that we're together on this Zoom. Yes, it's not physically in a room, but we are together. And as we break bread together, we are one body. And as we drink together, we do remember Jesus' blood shed for us. Even though we're in different places, we're doing that together. That's the heart of this, not the way in which we do it, whether we have deacons at the front or whether we pass it around to one another or come forward to receive it. None of those things matter. Even whether it's red wine or, fruit juice, it doesn't matter. The important thing is that we're doing this as we remember Jesus together. And so that's what we're doing today. Let's also remember that it's, at this time in our church when we've got lots of votes, we've had votes about votes, haven't we, just recently, about how we vote. And we're going to be talking about leadership structure and new elections and making this, as we make decisions going forward like this, let's not get caught up in all the rules and all the different administrative things that we have to do. These things are important, but they're not as important and as necessary as being about God's kingdom work, which is the kind of thing we were talking about with what Joanna's going to do, what Aaron was talking about before, that we make Jesus known, that we share him with others, that we build his kingdom, that we live lives that are witnesses for Jesus, and that we remember Jesus at the heart of everything and his followers. The kingdom's the most important thing, and our unity as his body together. So let's remember that. Also, as we come around the table, let's make sure that our hearts are right today with Jesus and with one another, and that we're not looking to criticize and find fault in each other or in different things like the Jewish leaders were doing, as they were just trying to find a fault amidst all the other things. Let's find the good and concentrate on those things and celebrate those things, and most of all celebrate Jesus and all he has done for us. Let's repent again of our shortcomings and recommit our faith in him and to follow his ways and not ours.